Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox, and thanks for logging on. If you love these watches, email me, tmosso at thewatchbox.com. It's your purchase and pricing email question line for buying these or any watches you see on any Watchbox platform. Reach out to me, tmosso at thewatchbox.com. Do you notice anything special about this trio of 60th anniversary Omega watches? Matched serial numbers. Back in 2017, Omega launched its 60th anniversary trilogy, Speedmaster, Seamaster 300, and Railmaster, bringing back favored references from this historic family of Omega sports watches and bringing them back each in 3,557 pieces. But within that pool, 557 sets of three with special matched serial numbers and matching serial dials were created, and this is number 459 of that 557 set run. Matched serials with dials that set them apart from the standard trilogy models. You can see each one features an identical serial just above the cannon pinion. Now let's get some basics out of the way here. These cases are physically identical, and they result in very close dimensions. Not identical, but close. They also create some quirks, such as the only Speedmaster of which I'm aware that boasts 60-meter water resistance. I've seen 100, I've seen 50. This is new to me. So the timepiece that you see right here is the Speedmaster, paying tribute to 60 years of the Omega Speedmaster. This timepiece references the historic model CK2915. Now this Speedmaster is in stainless steel, like all three of these watches are. I'm going to throw it on my wrist. The case itself is 48 millimeters lug to lug. It has a 19 millimeter spacing between the lugs. They all have the same bracelet and clasp. It measures 38.6 millimeters, and that's by virtue of the bezel. The three different bezels on these watches result in three marginally different sizes. They are very different in thickness, however. This one is 13.9 millimeters thick. Now, the timepiece, we'll throw it on my wrist, which is 16 centimeters in circumference. It wears well. It's comfortable. It's a lot like the first Omega in space or the CK2998 case. If you're familiar with that, this wears exactly like it. You can see that I've got plenty of clearance at each side of my wrist. That's the down the barrel shot. The over-the-top shot confirms, and then although it's not particularly thin, it does slide under a cuff, and I would have no trouble fitting this under my sleeve right here. The timepiece could probably be worn on a wrist as small as 13 centimeters in circumference, because as you can see, the bracelet, which is designed to evoke a vintage piece, it pulls straight down. There's no protrusion past the lugs. Now, taking a look at the hardware, I'm going to reiterate that the bracelets and clasps here are identical, so I'm not going to spend too much time on them, but you can see they are broad link with polished flanks, satin centers, polished faces, and unlike their vintage prototypes, the removable links are fixed in place with screws. We have a clasp, just as on the dial on the crown, there is a vintage Omega logo, circa 1957. Twin trigger release, you can see there are polished bevels on the exterior of the clasp, and then inside there is a push-button slider that gives you 9.6 millimeters of incremental sizing adjustment. It is a very solid and well-built bracelet, and as you can see, it has a wonderful set of gaps on the underside to avoid pinching skin, pulling hair, or trapping wrist heat. Jumping back to the case itself, we'll close this up so you can see how the single fold works. You can see that the case also features a vintage Omega logo on the crown, and in a tribute to the vintage Naiad crowns, you can see there's a little tri-spoke on it inside the logo. Pump style pushers, this is a lot like the first Omega in space and the CK2998 series. Like a vintage watch, it has a thin mid case. Here it's satin finished, squared off on the ends, minimally beveled, polished lug hoods, polished bevels, polished underside of the tachymeter with a satin finished top. You can see that there is no asymmetrical guard style case like you'd find on a moonwatch. This is a much older design. The crystal is sapphire, but it has a domed camber to evoke a vintage plexiglass as the original would have equipped. And if you look closely, you can actually see it center over the hands. There's a little etched Omega logo underneath the crystal, as you would have seen on the vintage plexiglass. So this is very true to form, while still maintaining sapphire scratch resistance. Matte dial base, matched serial number, Trilogy 459, Fotina. All three watches have it on both the hands and the dial. And then you can see there are in tribute to the original, broad arrow, hour hand, and little white varnished alpha hands with sunken registers. The timepiece does feature inside a classic moonwatch caliber. Again, a moonwatch being 50 meters water resistant, but this particular case, without a screw down crown, is good for 60. So 60 years and 60 meters, you can remember it easily. It's a moonwatch caliber though, which means it has a manual wind 48-hour power reserve. It operates by cam function selector and lateral clutch engagement. The 48-hour reserve ticks away at 21,600 vibrations per hour, and it pivots on 18 joules. It is the movement still used on watches issued by NASA. So while it has something of a pre-moon profile to it, it does have a moonwatch movement on the inside. Now, jumping over to the Railmaster, this might be my favorite of the three and probably the closest Omega's ever come to building a Rolex Explorer. This is in tribute to the original CK2914. There was also an Omega Ranchero that came out as part of the series. That was not reissued in 2017, so this is the simplest model. Now, as you can see, it too features that dramatically domed sapphire with the same little Omega logo on the underside. The dial is different, though, and the watch is 38 millimeters because the bezel is more compact than the other two. So nominally, at least, even though the case is the same, this is the smallest in diameter. It is, however, the thinnest by a large margin. At 13.1 millimeters thick, it has the same 19 millimeter lug spacing, clasp, and bracelet. The dial has quarter Arabics, large wedge-shaped triangular indices, and then you can see there's a broad arrow hour hand, the Railmaster script. You've got your vintage Omega logo here, here, under the crystal, and of course here. And you can see condition is outstanding. It is with a push-down crown, 60 meters water resistant, and inside is the caliber 8806, which is very similar to what you find in the current Diver 300 meter, but without the date. So you have the hacking or stop seconds feature, bidirectional automatic winding. You have a 55-hour power reserve with a single barrel. It beats away at 25,200 vibrations per hour, has 35 joules. It has a full balance bridge and a free sprung index for shock resistance, and a silicone hairspring to make it effectively amagnetic to over 15,000 Gauss. What else does it have? Well, it has a master chronometer certification, which meets all the COSC standards but goes beyond as a fully cased up watch. So this is a master chronometer, meaning it's been tested in 6 positions for chronometry, but also for shock resistance, water resistance, anti-magnetism, winding efficiency, power reserve. It is a fully tested, fully vetted system that Omega has set up alongside the Swiss Federal Institute of Metrology, which advised on this certification. Moreover, there is a coaxial escapement tri-level, which was invented by George Daniels in 1974, industrialized by Omega in 1999, and these days allows these watches to maintain unerring accuracy, courtesy of the tangential contact between impulsing and impulsed surfaces in the escapement, the direct and the indirect impulse. This is a very fascinating escapement, probably the most exotic you can buy for under $50,000 in a deceptively simple watch. Okay, this one is probably going to be the crowd pleaser because dive watches, they're sort of the thing on the market in general, and this is the dive watch of the trilogy. Omega Seamaster 300, paying tribute to the vintage reference 2913. Because of the bezel on this one, it is nominally the largest at 39 millimeters, but remember the cases are identical with one exception. This is the only one of the 3 that features a screw-down crown. Now the timepiece, as you can see, is swimmable with over 100 meters of water resistance. It is the only one that I would actually advise for swimming. The timepiece includes a bidirectional bezel like the original, so though this is a dive-style watch, technically it is not an ISO 6425 modern-day statutory diver. And inside the clasp, you can see you have the push-button slider, so though it is a dive watch, it does not have a separate fold-out extension. Again, think dive style, and you've got the right idea. Also unconventional is the fact that this is an unusual mission timer style bezel. It is a count down rather than a count up bezel, something you rarely see on dive watches. You've got that little Omega logo underneath the crystal. You've got that bubble-like profile, but not as much as on the others, making it easier to view the time from different angles while submerged. You have quarter Arabics on the dial, no date, of course, and then internally you've got exactly the same movement that we saw in the Railmaster with all the same capabilities. I'll throw it on my wrist just so you get a good sense of how it fits and how it sits. You should already know, if you watched before, that my wrist is relatively compact and these watches are a good match. This is the thickest of the three, however, at 14.3 millimeters, but you can see it still sits easily enough underneath a cuff. Reach out to me, Tim Mosso at thewatchbox.com, for purchase and pricing details of this matched serial Trilogy. Okay, we're back with the Trilogy by night. Here is the Seamaster 300, which, just to be complete, is 300 meters water resistant. I mentioned over 100. It is fully 300 meters water resistant. Right here, you can see we have the lovely Railmaster, which is probably the most interesting of the three to look at after dark. And then here you can see we have the Speedmaster, which is a more basic loomed dial.